everyone. First of all, thank you for all of your prayers. And I've no doubt, like many of us, were sighing some relief come October, but also just deep gratitude that those prayers were answered. It's hard to believe it was just 2 weeks shy of a year ago that I spoke with you. In fact, it was the week after that I did appear on Prayers One last year, that I appeared on News Talk ZB in a national debate, which was really, in a sense, a kind of a beautifully illustrative event in terms of the way that the campaign went. I found myself telling Ross Bell, the then CEO of the Drug Foundation, that he again was misquoting some stats from Canada, particularly around youth use of cannabis. And he then said this on national radio: "I'm not here to debate the facts." Heather Duplessis Allen said, "Actually, I'm pretty sure, Ross, that's exactly what we're here to do." And we realized that that was essentially the campaign in a nutshell. We were focused around the facts. They were focused around ideology. And it was very much a David versus Goliath kind of endeavor. There were two no referendums, and of course they were closely linked. Family First had its No Means No campaign around both referenda topics, and Say No to Dope as well, which of course Family First was a key partner in that as well. There were 10 registered yes campaigns, not to mention a national media who most certainly were on their side. So, you know, the result in the end was a lot closer than we thought. I will not forget the election day, or at least the result day after the election, anytime soon. I'd started the day in Christchurch and was flying back at lunchtime to attend a press conference that afternoon. It was one of those few flights where you have the internet on the flight, and I sat there refreshing my phone over and over again, waiting for those preliminary results to come through. I confess I was probably sweating a bit. I hope the guy next to me didn't think I was a terrorist, because I certainly looked nervous. And when the result came through, it was a huge sigh of relief. And even that day wasn't without its charms. I went back to the Family First office to greet the rest of the team. And as we were traveling down together from the 4th floor to the 1st to attend the press conference, the lift got stuck and wouldn't move. And we had to call the security people, and eventually we managed to jimmy the doors open and escape the elevator, by which time I was well and truly sweating. But nonetheless, what a fabulous day it was to be able to front the campaign that was, for us, a pretty rare victory in terms of a conservative voice, a Christian voice. We've not had many wins, and so we'll take this one. And we were glad, particularly on election day, to hear the Prime Minister and Andrew Little affirm that they were going to honour the result, close as it was, that the no would stand. And we're very grateful for that, because that sort of announcement to the media has really been the reason that calls for decriminalisation have so far fallen on deaf ears. To be clear, the call around decriminalisation that has followed, on the one hand, is very much a bait and switch, right? It's like, well, we asked the country about legalisation, and now we're going to pretend that actually the issue is decriminalisation, because they were aware that more people were open to decriminalising cannabis. And indeed, we could see the merits in some respects of decriminalisation. However, the question that's being now put to our politicians is to decriminalise all drugs. That's what the groups that have come together to advocate for that are saying. Let's decriminalise every single drug that you can think of: P, heroin, cocaine, ecstasy, the lot. And that, of course, is not something that we believe that those who voted no would vote yes for. The other thing about decriminalisation that's worth noting for those who are wondering why we might still have some objections to that, and that is simply to note that it's not a law change that changes behaviour. For example, in Portugal, which is often promoted as the great example of how decriminalisation can work, their system is far more complex than simply having decriminalised drugs. In that system, if you get found with drugs, you have 3 days to appear before a special drug rehabilitation tribunal. And you have the option of then being directed towards healthcare or paying a fine if you refuse to do that. And they have a very well set up wraparound drug addiction service designed to help people get off drugs. And we know that actually the reduction in the use of drugs has got little to do with law change and a lot to do with infrastructure. And so for us, the calls around decriminalisation are met with this reminder that unless you're going to pay for counsellors, for drug addiction workers, for community housing, for people who are coming off drugs, then nothing's going to really make a big difference in terms of a change in the law. Of course, the other point is that we have a soft form of decriminalisation in the current legal framework. We did rewrite the Misuse of Drugs Act in 2019 to make a health approach the mandated policing policy. So in actual fact, not much would change for people under a decriminalisation regime. So we don't think that that's worth shooting for. And of course, as someone who appeared in many public debates, I can tell you that the Yes campaigners were always telling me how decriminalisation was a bad option, that somehow it would incentivise the gangs. And so consequently, it's hard to really believe that they want decriminalisation, but in a sense, they will settle for anything. But thank goodness, the Prime Minister has said no. We said it was no. There's clearly no appetite for this. They're not willing, the Labor government, to spend their political capital on this issue. And in that regard, we can probably be grateful for the timing. Being the second term for a Labor government means that they're reluctant to spend their political capital. In fact, already maybe regretting some of the things that they've suggested because they spent a long time in opposition. And of course, as we're seeing with other issues that have come to light, how quickly the polls can turn, how quickly a stable government becomes one that might be wondering what it's like to be on the backbenches after all. So I don't think, in light of how unpopular some of these other moves have been in the last few months, that decriminalisation is going to reappear. However, you never really know. Certainly it will be advocated for by the Greens rather than Labor, but it would seem unlikely that Labor would be willing to further disenfranchise the soft Labor voters, those who had been national voters who voted for Labor, perhaps hoping to block the Greens from having any more power. So in that regard, we're hopeful for the status quo for at least a little while longer. In the meantime, the research keeps coming out. Now, before I look at the research, let me tell you, if you want a good summary of the election campaign, I presented that in all of its glory at the recent Forum on the Family. The video of that is on the Family First website, and YouTube channel, along with a lot of other information around the Say No to Dope campaign. With respect to research, let me just tell you some of the things that have come to light since the referendum, because that in a sense was the challenge, wasn't it? Would it continue to prove to be bad news, legalisation? Well, I can tell you that the research that's come out has only affirmed the wisdom of saying no to dope. In Colorado, for example, it's still the case that African Americans are twice as likely to be arrested on cannabis charges than Europeans are. And so there's been no addressing of the social justice issues as promised. There's no evidence that Black or Hispanic Americans are involved in the legal sale of cannabis in places like Colorado. So that has not addressed the social justice issues. I'll remind you that in the poorer neighborhoods of Denver, there's one cannabis dispensary for every 47 adults. We're now seeing some new things come up in terms of health-related issues. Cannabis-induced psychosis. We've seen a several 100% increase in teenagers appearing in hospitals in Canada with drug-induced psychosis, who are having incredible psychotic events and being admitted to the emergency department. We've seen the suicide rate of teenagers in Colorado continue to be incredibly high compared to the national average. In terms of youth usage, that continues to be high. In Colorado, the youth use of cannabis is 76% higher than the national average. We're even seeing it at home, the problem that we suspected would happen with edible products. In Christchurch recently, a 2-year-old was hospitalized after consuming cannabis cookie dough. So we know that it's happening right here. And some other problems that are happening in the US is that now the strength of the cannabis is so high that those who are being admitted to emergency departments are now vomiting a lot. And as part of the psychosis, one teenager said it felt like he wanted to be Edward Scissorhands and rip his stomach open and tear out his intestines. So that is a pretty intense kind of result. And finally, LA police recently made a record 1.6 billion, that's with a B, black market cannabis bust. So we know the black market doesn't go away. In Colorado, it continues to be a huge problem. In Canada, we've seen a bounce back in terms of the black market. The results, the trends are just as they had been. There doesn't seem to be any turnaround. And so in that regard, we can feel confident that the rationale for voting no remains so. The difficulty is getting this information in front of our politicians, getting them to acknowledge it, because as I say, facts don't seem to matter anymore. Ideology wants to win the day. And that's what we're up against, folks, is that it is very much a mindset. It's ideology we're fighting against. And that means that in a sense, no logic, no facts prevail, because in many respects, this perspective is almost like a faith position. It's just a set of beliefs to the left, particularly, who hold to this, and those libertarian right-wing conservatives. But unfortunately, these can't be defeated by simply pointing to the research. But that should fill us with confidence that we have protected our young, we've protected our marginalized, vulnerable communities from being further targeted. And our only hope really is that the police can continue to be vigilant in terms of trying to get to the black market and ensure that it's choked off at the supply. We've yet to see the changes we need to see, which is around education and around health measures. We don't have enough counsellors. We don't have enough educators in our schools. And that's where we need to make our next bit of progress. And that really is where we're up to on the cannabis issue. And certainly I'd be very happy to answer any questions if I'm able.
Point here on one of your prayer points, if I can jump ahead of you, is that you're asking us to pray that churches will step into the community needs. And I think just in my general conversations and the ministries I'm involved with, we're seeing an increasing number of needs within the community, particularly people who have been impacted by drugs. So do you have any pointers in that regard for us?
Well, I think we just need to be mindful as a church community that we are often reluctant to step into spaces that, to be perfectly honest, cannot really benefit the church. They are difficult spaces. They don't bring in lots of new people to the church. They don't make us more able to do things. They're quite a drain on resources. So a lot of churches are frankly reluctant. But what we do know is that what actually helps people come out of a life of addiction is connection. In fact, the research would say that in many respects, addiction is a kind of false bonding. It's a bonding to something rather than to someone. And so it often fills the space that relationships are supposed to fill. And that's why we see so much damage to relationships. This is an incredible space for the church to step into. That's our go-to. We know about community. We know about caring for people. And we know that the government is not able to provide this, that there's a huge deficit. And I just think it could be an incredible opportunity for us to step in. Now, I think in the wider arc of evangelism, it's worth us considering too, that to be seen working among the lowest of the low, among those who cannot benefit us, is very hard to criticize. And given that the church currently does not have a high trust status with the society, I think it would be good for us to be thinking about ways in which we can model the coming kingdom and model community life in a way that helps restore some of that broken trust. The concern, of course, for those of us who are advocating to politicians is that they're simply not always listening. So one of the prayer points is that lawmakers will actually read the research. They get a lot of things sent to them and acknowledge these trends and see that actually the case is not towards legalization. We know, thanks to people like Mike King, at least by sort of some reference point, that we need increased funding for counselling, both for young people in his case around the issue of suicide, but in this case also. There's no point looking at law change if we're not going to be able to care for people. And of course, this is another opportunity for Christians to step into this sector and to realize this is a space where God's people have something incredible to offer, particularly because, as I say, we offer relationship, not just the skill of the counsellor, but the community that the counsellor represents and exists in is a place of hope, a source of hope for broken people who are often, as a result of their addiction too, needing to cut ties with their community. I know that when I was giving up cannabis, I remember going to the tinny shop one more time with a friend of mine, and I sat in the car with them, and I said, I will buy these drugs one more time for you, but this is the last time. And not only was it the last time I ever bought drugs, it was pretty much the last time I ever saw him. I had to cut ties. I realized I could not hang out with people who are doing drugs and stay clean and keep following Jesus. So people are in this vacuum. When they leave one world, another world is calling, and I think this is a great opportunity.
Yeah.